Today we're going to be continuing to read Journey by Patricia McLachlan, and we are going to read through Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Cooper appeared, as he always did, through my bedroom window, this time carrying his baby brother close to his chest in a sling, like a chimpanzee carrying its young. Cooper's face was round and smooth, his brown hair cut even around his face, as if his mother might have placed an aluminum bowl over his head. Cooper's face grew even fatter with love when he saw my sister. Kat, sitting on my bed, looking through the photograph album, smiled back at Cooper. She liked him, even though he was my best friend. She liked him even though he was, in my grandfather's words, besotted with her. Almost every year since he was 6, Cooper had proposed marriage to my sister. So? Cooper raised his eyebrows at me. I shook my head. Cooper knew that Mama had gone, but he wouldn't ask questions. Questions like, where is she? Why hasn't she written a letter? Why did she go? Who's to blame here? I looked up, startled at my own thought, half afraid I'd spoken out loud. But Kat and Cooper were looking at the baby. The baby, Emmett, reached his small hand out to Kat, the movement jerky, as if his head wasn't telling his hand how. Kat, smiling, put out her finger, and the baby took it, a sudden contented look settling like silk over his face. Cooper smiled down at Emmett. I've got him for a whole hour while Mama weeds the garden, he said, happily untangling Emmett from the sling. To shape or ruin his lima bean brain. What shall it be? Emmett leaned back against Cooper and stared at me, as if waiting for an answer. His eyes all dark, wet, and wise, and so direct that after a moment I looked away. He looks like you, Cooper, said Kat. We all look alike, said Cooper. The whole family, down through the ages, over prairie and sea, desert and mountain. You could toss all our pictures up in the air, and when they came down, they'd all look like me. Kat laughed, and the baby laughed too, making us all laugh. Well, I don't look like anyone, I said. Anyone that I know. Kat scrambled over the bed to pick up the album, turning the pages. Cooper pointed suddenly. Is that you, Kat? In the garden? Kat was quiet. No, she said slowly. That's Mama. Mama a long time ago. Oh. There was a pause, and Cooper looked at me uncomfortably. It's just that we look so much the same, finished Kat. She turned back in the album. There, that's who I look like. It was Grandma's picture in the garden swing, with the smile. Very carefully, Kat took the picture out of the album and walked to the mirror. She held the picture up in front of her and smiled. There, you see? Cooper and I stood behind her, the baby grinning at us all in the mirror. Yes, said Cooper, I do. Kat looked at me, waiting. Yes, I said. It was as if we all stood there, taking a strange oath, in front of a girl with light-touched hair and another who looked the same, but not the same in the picture, and now had gray hair tied back with a string. But, I couldn't help but adding, you look like Mama, too. Kat's smile became set and her eyes narrowed, and then the baby gave a sudden excited leap in Cooper's arms, and Grandfather stood behind us. Ah, he said to the baby, look who's come for a visit. Hello, Cooper. Grandfather took the camera from around his neck and handed it to me. He held out his arms, and Emmett went to him happily, grabbing for his glasses. Laughing, Grandfather took off his glasses and held them out for Cooper to take. And in that moment, I held the camera up to my eyes to hide my surprise. Without his glasses, my grandfather's face changed. Sharp places became softer. Through the camera, I could see the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes that made his eyes less hard. His face smoothed out. He looked younger. He looked... Without thinking, I pressed the button and the shutter clicked. Grandfather looked up. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to do that. No, Journey. He smiled at me and sat down on the bed with the baby. You could take all the pictures you want. Grandfather sat Emmett on his knees and took his hands. Trot, trot to Boston. Trot, trot to Lynn. Emmett bounced and grinned. I held the camera up to my face, my eyes closed. Trot, trot to Boston. Trot, trot to Lynn. Watch out, little boy, or you'll fall in. We are in the garden, the light slanting through the trees. Tall flowers, hollyhocks, are nearby, blooms against the barn. Up and down I go, my eyes fastened on white buttons against a blue shirt. The smell of summer fills the air, and voices rising and falling, and laughter. Watch out, little boy, or you'll... My eyes go up from the shirt button to the neck, but there is no face. Fall in! Cooper and Kat laughed. My eyes opened, and I looked through the viewfinder at Grandfather and at Emmett falling back between his knees, their faces in identical expressions, eyes wide, mouths in an O. The baby's laughter fell like sunlight across the room, and as I pressed the button, I wished for a way to save that sound, too. And then Grandfather stood up and put on his glasses again. Slowly, I lowered the camera. The baby crawled on the floor. Kat was turning the pages of the photograph album. Cooper yawned. Everything had changed. Grandfather ran his fingers through his hair, looking over my head into the mirror behind me. I turned, and our eyes met. I frowned, and he frowned, imitating me, but I wouldn't smile. I took the camera from around my neck and handed it to him. Things don't look the same through the camera, I said. Not the way they are in real life. Putting the camera strap around his neck, he paused, then straightened. Sometimes, he tilted his head to one side and spoke to himself in the mirror. And sometimes pictures show us what is really there. How? How can that be? I asked. Grandfather lifted his shoulders in a familiar way, then said something unlike him. I don't know, Journey. Maybe that's why people take pictures. To see what is there. Kat shut the photograph album with a snap, like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence. Emmett on the floor began to fuss, and I bent down to pick him up. He looked at me closely. Then, with a sigh, he put his arms around my neck and lay his head down. My heart seemed to beat faster with the feel of it. What do you mean, to see what is there? I asked for a moment, but when I turned around, Grandfather had gone. What does he mean? I asked Kat. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a photograph. It was old, very old and grainy, as if taken through water or sand or wind. In the picture, there was a boy holding the reins of a horse. Plowed fields spread out behind him, furrows as straight as train tracks. The horse nuzzled the boy's pocket as if there might be sugar cubes there, or an apple, but the boy stared into the camera with a face so familiar that I caught my breath. Boy, said Cooper beside me, that could be you, Journey. Said Emmett, echoing Cooper. Is that a picture of Papa? I asked Kat. Cooper snorted. Even I know who that is. Emmett, stirring in my arms, turned to stare at me as if he knew too. Two of a kind, said Kat. I saw the face in that picture every day in the mirror, and I'd just seen that face through the camera. That picture was of my grandfather.